we need to hit the ground running. These technological innovations are happening very quickly, whether you believe in, say, a singularity, the way some people talk about, or not. It really doesn't matter. Billions of dollars are pouring into artificial intelligence now, and brain enhancement corporations have been opened up by people like Elon Musk. I think it's important that we start publicly discussing the issues so that business leaders, people in policy, academics, the general public, we understand what we're talking about. Because as I urge in the book, misunderstanding the philosophical issues could lead to the failure of humans to flourish in the age of all these exciting technologies.
Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Ginger Campbell, and if you're a fan of brain science, let me assure you that this episode of Books and Ideas is being cross-posted in the Brain Science feed because although it's not about neuroscience per se, it's about a topic we have touched on recently. Could artificial intelligence become conscious? My guest today is Susan Schneider, author of a thought-provoking new book entitled Artificial You, AI and the Future of Your Mind. Before I jump into the interview, I just want to mention that you can find additional episodes of Books and Ideas for free in your favorite podcasting app or on our website at booksandideas.com. You can send me email at docartemis@gmail.com. You can submit voice feedback at speakpipe.com/docartemis. And you can post comments on the Books and Ideas Facebook fan page. Also, you can now help support Books and Ideas via Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/Books and Ideas. Okay, well, Susan, it is great to have you on the show today. Can you start out just by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a philosopher and a cognitive scientist. Since I started thinking about philosophy, I've always been fascinated by the mind. So I'm one of these people who took graduate courses in a lot of different fields, ranging from linguistics to neuroscience. And so I just started to get passionate about artificial intelligence, as well as the question of whether thinking itself might be computational in the case of humans. This new book is a way to explore these very multidisciplinary issues.
And one of the things I really like about your book is I get sent lots of books. I don't get one every day, but I get several a week. And so I've gotten probably several on this topic, and yours is the first one that I actually read. And I think the reason I read it was because I was attracted to the questions that you were exploring. You went beyond, well, could machines be conscious, to, well, what would that mean? And what would it mean to us personally? So those are the kinds of questions I hope to explore in our conversation today. But why don't we start out by you just giving us a little bit of an overview and tell us a little bit more about why you wrote this particular book.
So when I was a graduate student, I had the honor of working with a leading philosopher of mind, a quite famous philosopher of mind. At the time, he was a vocal critic of a view called connectionism, and that was a position on the format of thought. So we were all debating whether thought was computational, and he was criticizing a view which is now called deep learning. You might have heard of that. Mm-hmm. And so in my teaching, because, I was lucky, I got to teach at Rutgers University fourth-year students. 10 years ago, I was teaching on these issues and thinking about the scope of deep learning systems. We called them connectionist systems, and what their intellectual limitations would be versus classical computations. All of that I was applying to the brain. So as deep learning took off, I started to take the issues even more seriously because, lo and behold, The world Go champion is an AI, the world Jeopardy champion, the world chess champion, and it's getting faster and smarter by the minute. So I think now there's some serious issues on the table. I mean, one day we may have intelligent systems that outmode us in the workplace, that rival human intelligence. And AI, as I explained in the book, it may even go inside the head and try to augment human intelligence.
So we need to start thinking about what this is going to mean before it happens.
We need to hit the ground running. These technological innovations are happening very quickly, whether you believe in, say, a singularity, the way some people talk about, or not. It really doesn't matter. Billions of dollars are pouring into artificial intelligence now, and brain enhancement corporations have been opened up by people like Elon Musk. I think it's important that we start publicly discussing the issues so that business leaders, people in policy, academics, the general public, we understand what we're talking about. Because as I urge in the book, misunderstanding the philosophical issues could lead to the failure of humans to flourish in the age of all these exciting technologies.
As I understand it, one of the key themes of your book is that the philosophical implications of AI and whether AI could be conscious. So, of course, we're talking a lot about consciousness, so I think I ought to ask, what is your definition?
It's tricky because philosophers will debate the issue, but I'll give you the simple answer because I think it's something that a lot of people agree on. It's the felt quality of experience. So when you're seeing the rich hues of a sunset or you're smelling the aroma of your morning coffee, it feels like something to be you. You are having conscious experience. So every moment of your waking life, and even when you're dreaming, you are a conscious being. And, many people believe that non-human animals are conscious as well. It feels like something to be them. Consciousness is not the same thing as conscience. And I confess, when I was an undergraduate, when I was first learning these issues, I conflated them. And I think a lot of people understandably do. But the example I like to give is, it felt like something to be Jeffrey Dahmer when he's, massacring people. He probably had all kinds of conscious experiences, but he didn't have a conscience.
Okay. Just so that we can set the stage for the future, the three threads that I appreciated in your book that I hope we can explore. One is, whether, of course, AI will be conscious, the role of enhancement, which you alluded to, and also that whole idea of uploading or merging with artificial intelligence. Is there anything else that you think is a key theme that we need to include?
Well, the only other thing which I think is, super key, and I probably shouldn't have put it toward the end of the book, I'm learning, is that I take up this issue that I think is very commonplace in cognitive science, which is the idea that the mind is a program. So it's a certain view of the nature of the self and mind.
Yeah, the idea of the mind as software.
Exactly.
I'm going to get to that pretty early because we'll talk a little bit about the question of whether AI can be conscious, but I really am more interested in those last two because I think that that's where we have that personal connection that I think we all need to be thinking about. You talk a lot in your book about transhumanism and you identify yourself as a transhumanist. Would you explain what that means and how it relates to what we're talking about?
Transhumanism is a social and cultural movement that has been around for a long time. It's something that seems to many people quite friendly, and that's simply the idea that we should use science and technology to enhance our lifespans, make us smarter, and just improve our overall quality of life. But the way that many transhumanists go about it is more controversial. So key transhumanists include Elon Musk, Nick Bostrom, who recently wrote a wonderful book on superintelligence that became a bestseller. Stephen Hawking was a transhumanist in a lot of mind-related things he said. Michio Kaku tends in that direction, and famously Ray Kurzweil. The idea that transhumanists generally have is that we achieve this sort of future of human flourishing by transcending the biological brain and body. And yes, that's where we get to issues about what are we? Could we really transcend the brain? Could we survive the death of the brain? Well, most transhumanists argue yes. In fact, we could digitize our thoughts, if you will. We could upload to the cloud and maybe even have a kind of afterlife of the mind, if you will, and even last until the heat death of the universe if the technology is good enough.
How do you feel about that idea?
Oh boy, how do I feel? I think they've been drinking too much Kool-Aid. Gosh, who wouldn't want to improve the lot of all humans on the planet, end resource scarcity, achieve practical immortality, like at least until the end of the universe, get smarter? Kurzweil has a lovely vision of our merging with AI and we become super intelligent and the universe lights up with intelligence. It almost sounds like a depiction of heaven. But unfortunately, I don't think that is a coherent idea. And so that's what I argue in the book. I am a technophile. I have an earlier book on science fiction. So I use science fiction thought experiments a lot in the book. We don't even know if machines are conscious right now. I mean, we don't even know what ultimate substrate we'll be using in microchips that we build conscious machines with. And we don't know that we can put microchips in the brain that will actually allow us to still be conscious beings. So one of the most important elements of the book is this notion of consciousness or the felt quality of experience, because obviously what the transhumanists were promising to do was to bring about a higher form of consciousness.
One of the things I appreciated in the book that I thought was a really interesting philosophical question that you bring up is on the idea of the sci-fi idea of the isomorph or the exact duplicate that we upload into the cloud. First of all, as you point out, we don't even know if that's doable. And it's probable that the first things that are going to be conscious are not going to be isomorphs. So we need to be thinking about what they really are going to look like, right?
Yeah, first and foremost, I take the book to have a sort of social obligation to deal with impending mistakes that society might make. It's not far-fetched at all to think that in 50 years or even 30 years, there will be human-looking AIs. There are already AI programs, well, I should say robotics programs like the Japanese androids that look very human-like. And so I anticipate that as the artificial intelligence component gets better and better, humans will easily assume that those machines are conscious, probably because of all the cool science fiction, right? Like iRobot and Ex Machina. So we tend to think if it looks human, it will be human or be human-like in the sense that it's conscious. So I took those issues as centering the book as being very important because we need to understand who's in the class of conscious or sentient beings. But above and beyond that, as a philosopher, I'm fascinated by the far future possibilities as well. And even then, it's not at all clear to me that we could create conscious AI. I mean, there are all sorts of obstacles that I could talk about. And it's also just from a practical standpoint, not clear that AI companies would even want to invest the money in doing that.
Plus the whole ethical dilemma of once you have created something conscious, you can't turn it off. I mean, that would be murder, right?
Yeah, well, honestly, emerging technologies always involve technological developments that come before our social capacity to deal with them. And I anticipate dialing out conscious machines in labs. I mean, it could be that at the R&D stage, someone does that and we just never know it. And I find that, of course, quite frightening. There's a lot of interest in artificial intelligence right now on machine consciousness. So, I've talked to the military about it a lot, for instance. And the reason is actually, it's not futuristic or silly. Consciousness is correlated in the brain with a lot of mental activities that involve executive function. So if we can crack the consciousness nut, and if we can reverse engineer that into machines, maybe we can be the first to build what some people call AGI, or I'll just say general intelligence, an intelligence that's multifaceted and creative and can move from one topic domain to the next in a way that's similar to humans. So that's been the holy grail of a lot of advanced AI projects. Consciousness is a real serious issue for people working on general intelligence.
So for those of us that aren't in this field, the ones that we have now are dedicated, like the AI that plays Go, just plays Go, right?
That's exactly right, Ginger. So over at DeepMind, I've met with researchers who are working on general intelligence. And in a way, that's their holy grail. So yes, currently the systems excel in specific topics. But for your neuroscience listeners, here's something very interesting. Historically in neuroscience, there have been people who've pointed things out, like the mini column is a sort of generic unit in the brain, and maybe the neocortex just replicates certain algorithm over and over again, so that once you crack, say, the format of thought for a small part of the neocortex, you've got it. One person who I see as friendly to that kind of view would be, say, Jeffrey Hawkins.
That's exactly who I was thinking of as you were talking, because I've had him on the show several times, and he's talked about that.
I always assign his book to students who don't have a background in computational neuroscience, even though ironically he says he's not a computationalist, which he is. But you also see that view in Ray Kurzweil's recent book, How to Build a Mind. Now, if that turns out to be true, then it's going to be much easier potentially to move in the direction of artificial general intelligence than we thought. So we just don't really know how far away we are. People over at DeepMind are very sophisticated. They know a lot of neuroscience. And the interesting thing is that they're willing to use it to the extent that it gets the job done. Like, for example, the world Go champion, the AI, does not run algorithms that are at all human-like. To crack Go, different types of principles were used. They may not even need to pull in a lot of principles from cognitive or computational neuroscience.
Right. And that brings me to another thought-provoking idea that you had in your book, which was the idea that biological consciousness could actually become outmoded or obsolete. Would you expand on that idea a little?
Yeah, that is such a scary thought. So I also dabble a bit in astrobiology. In fact, I'm currently the NASA chair at the Library of Congress and with NASA. What I think about there is the evolution of intelligent life across the universe. So think about exoplanet research. NASA, for instance, is very friendly to the idea that these exoplanets that we're identifying are inhabited, not just habitable in principle, but there really could be life there. But there's a big debate in the astrobiology community on the origins of life, and we don't really understand the origins of life. But suppose that there is life out there, and suppose it survives its technological maturity, at least some of it. So you get advanced civilizations. Well, if we're flipping on our computers, and if we're talking about becoming cyborgs, maybe that is something that technology does. And the most advanced civilizations are actually post-biological. They're civilizations that moved beyond the biological brain. They either have entire communities of artificial intelligences or cyborgs. If that's the case, that changes how we might look for alien life. And it also changes our perspective on consciousness. And so let me get to that to more directly answer your question. It's not clear at all, as I explain in the book, that highly intelligent AIs even need consciousness. It could be that their architecture doesn't demand it, or consciousness could be a relic of biological elements of the brain that don't need to be coded into a machine in order to get the machine to be highly intelligent. As civilizations progress over time, consciousness diminishes.
And that's not as weird as it sounds if you think about the fact that most of what our brains do is actually unconscious, right? It appears that consciousness evolved in biological beings to help us survive, to help us to be adaptable, deal with change. And if it was possible to do that without being conscious.
Right. What I think we need to do is ask what we want.
Okay, that's a good one.
Hey, here we go. Okay, so as much as I would really love to be around for the heat death of the universe and become super intelligent through AI-based augmentations, if I'm told that I can only get this by losing my capacity for consciousness, I'm quite sure I would say no. It's not even clear that it would still be me if I enhanced in those radical ways. So I think we need to hit the ground running on this issue. So when people like Elon Musk tell us that we should merge with AI, the first question we need to ask is, would a mind-machine merger result in a person that's still conscious? And would it result in someone who is me in any meaningful sense? And so we should let that issue direct the future of these radical enhancement programs, not some business interests over at Facebook or Google. Oh, God. Facebook's working on this, by the way. They're working on all kinds of ways to wire us up to our digital devices through the mind or nervous system.
You brought out two parts of this that I want to explore. One is just the idea of enhancement, like if we got chips that helped us do things, or we had, we were plugged into the internet instead of what so many people are doing, walking around looking at their phone, look like they're about to be run over by a car. So it's not that far away. And then the whole idea of the uploading. Would you talk about what you see as the ethical or philosophical problems of either one of those options?
Sure. So I think there are a whole bunch of ethical issues with the idea of merging with AI. And let me start with something that I actually didn't address in my book, but right now I'm working with Congress. In fact, I'm presenting to them on the book in 2 weeks. And let me just mention, because, the politics of the here and now are really important. If you're worried about your data privacy right now, you think that you can't trust artificial intelligence systems because they're too opaque. So, if you're worried about issues that a lot of people are concerned about, you should be really worried about Facebook, Google, or any of these companies going inside the head. How would you like it if you had a brain chip that was selling your data or was so opaque that you had no way to tell if you could trust it or not? And what if you had to purchase the chip because without it, you couldn't keep up with artificial intelligence in the workplace? Technological unemployment is currently worrying a lot of people. We even have a presidential candidate who's made that issue his main platform. So if the solution is to augment humans, we need to really think hard about protecting our privacy and protecting our right to opt out. Right now, we're already being scanned at job interviews by facial recognition software that detects our emotions to see if we're trustworthy.
Even though it's not reliable.
It's a mess. It's a total mess. And look at the technology in the hands of authoritarian dictatorships like China. We could easily learn about this just by reading Cyberpunk, which is a wonderful genre of science fiction, like William Gibson, individuals like that. Okay, but that's one issue. And I'm actually writing some op-eds on that right now. But in the book, as a philosopher, what I felt was in a way more urgent because no one had done it, whereas there are a lot of people talking about these issues, I believe, or at least more people. I'm worried about what it means from the vantage point of the nature of the self, mind, and consciousness. Suppose you could walk into a Center for Mind Design, and standing before you is this giant menu. So it's sort of like a cafe, and you're like mulling over, what do I order? But instead of, seeing items like latte, instead there are these items like human savant, which would allow you to have, say, savant-like artistic or mathematical skills, or Zen master. I like that one, which will give you the Zen level meditative states of a grand master without having to do all the work. So there are all kinds of enhancements on the menu, and you can choose one or you could choose a bundle of several. And then the sort of next step on the menu that they're promising they're going to come up with in a few years is a full-on merge. So merge is a menu item that you can pre-order, and that allows you to replace large components, if not all, of the brain with microchips gradually, so that you sort of digitize yourself and become fully post-biological. Okay, so the question is, what would you do? And I hope that their answer is different when they finish the book, because I believe that thinking through the issues about what you are to begin with is absolutely essential to answering that question. And I think it is also an absolute game changer when it comes to how to proceed with brain enhancement technologies and how to view the androids that we may one day encounter, whether they're sentient or not. I mean, to answer those kinds of questions, we need to ask, what is the nature of the mind? Is the mind a program, for example? And what is the nature of the self? According to many leading views of the nature of the self, you actually wouldn't survive many of these procedures at the Center for Mind Design. I bet a lot of your listeners think that the idea that the mind is just the brain and, say, other elements of the nervous system as well, is a very important position that they can't easily rule out. And in fact, they may even adopt it. If the mind is the brain, and you buy merge, or even if you buy one or more of those brain chips, to the extent that that involves removing part of the biological brain and replacing it with chips, you've just killed yourself. So you've walked into the Mind Design Center and you'll never walk out. So you paid for your own death.
That's a sobering thought.
Yes. It was kind of hard to write that book. I have to say, I mean, it was like doomsday dystopia chapter after chapter, but I think it had to be said. And nobody thinks about this stuff. Like, I just gave a book talk over at Google, and you can now see my Google talk. It was just loaded. And the whole audience was like blown away. They're like, oh my God, we never thought of this. So I think a lot of people working in the field of artificial intelligence, or, on the business end of it, and in policy, and even philosophers, we never really thought about connecting all these issues up. And I think once you do, you realize that these classic philosophical problems that are visited by people like Locke, Hume, Nietzsche, and others have absolutely no easy solution. That's how philosophy is. Appreciating how vexing these issues are is probably a good point of departure in making up our minds about whether we should view androids or AIs in general that are sophisticated as conscious to the extent that we build such creatures, or whether we should seek to become cyborgs.
I want to take a moment to mention that I'm still sending out Amazon gift cards to listeners who send screenshots of their reviews. Send it to docartemis@gmail.com. Books and Ideas really needs more reviews. Also, in order to keep producing Books and Ideas every month, I could use your help in offsetting my expenses, especially audio editing. You can now support Books and Ideas at Patreon by going to patreon.com/booksandideas. books and ideas, and you can pick a monthly pledge that fits your budget. You can also make a single donation via Venmo, where my username is @DocArtemis. Thanks so much for your support. So we've made being a cyborg, I think, appropriately disgusting. So let's... But I'll tell you, the one that really got me in the book was, and I never wanted to do this anyway, but I still appreciated your take on it, this idea of, if you were going to upload yourself, then which one is you?
Oh, yeah. Philosophers know this well because there's a whole field called metaphysics, which has one of its major areas, the question, what is the nature of the person? And so we use thought experiments like this all the time. Thought experiments where you step into a scanner, your brain is scanned, and then all the computational details are mined, taken. And then there's a sort of replica of you that's created, say, on another continent. And of course, the thought experiment can continue. There could be hundreds of downloads from that program that was constructed based on your digital data. And, there's a serious issue there, like which one is you, right? Is every single one of them you? It's probably the case that the creature on the scanner is you. And if the process of scanning your brain meant that your biological brain was destroyed, you're actually dead. What you've done is you've created doppelgangers at best. And all this, of course, assumes technology, which I think is quite possibly impossible. That's what bothers me about transhumanists, because you see people like Stephen Hawking or Elon Musk doing all this great science. I am a big fan of Tesla. I'll just say that. And so they become big authorities and they start talking about the mind and the future of the mind. And I'm just hearing it all the time now, even in Washington, like with CEOs who visit and with politicians and whatnot. I mean, people think that the mind is a program. We can hack the mind. We could upload even, and that we could replace the brain with microchips and still be us. But, good scientists aren't always good philosophers, and they may not have ever had a class in metaphysics or ethics.
Yeah, and some of the best scientists these days are so anti-philosophy, so that's a problem too. There are some of the leading scientists who have said publicly that, philosophy doesn't have anything to offer, which is not healthy, because that means that they're not thinking about these questions.
Who I blame? I actually blame philosophers for being too obscure. I have a great lunch buddy at the Institute for Advanced Study, Freeman Dyson. He's like, oh, I can understand you. He's like, I don't usually like philosophers. And it's so funny because he's interested in all these philosophical questions. And, I find myself hanging out with a lot of the scientists now because, not only do I get a chance to ask all kinds of questions of them, but they are asking philosophical questions. And I love it when they step up to the plate and write these books. But what bothers me is when people assume that they have a special authority because they're good at AI, for example. I think philosophers have to definitely step up to the plate and be clearer, which is why, I wrote this book for the public. All too many issues are nested in really insider technical jargon that really won't make sense to the policymakers and ordinary people who will ultimately need to make decisions about the future of these technologies.
Well, I've read about how Congress has just blithely screwed up the copyright law again. So, if they can't even get something as simple as that right, I unfortunately don't trust them with these harder issues.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. I'm hoping that there's some progress made. There's an AI bill out there. There's a lot of concern for algorithmic discrimination, which is great. There's a lot of concern about keeping up with China, the role of AI in the military, and the lack of transparency in these AI systems. So I think they're interested in a lot of the right things. Yeah, it is a problem that certain members of Congress are not as up on the technologies. You can kind of hear that if you listen to the questioning of Zuckerberg the other day. But boy, they grilled Zuckerberg. It was great because I think he totally deserves it.
Yeah, because he's in a position to do either great harm or great good based on what decisions he makes.
He totally doesn't get it. It's unbelievable. The companies that put forward a more positive vision of technology are the ones that we should support. And I think the public's starting to get it. I mean, I think that Cambridge Analytica Facebook mess taught a lot of people a lesson. At an everyday level, our technologies are very opaque right now. It's frustrating even to me. I mean, my stupid cell phone, right? Trying to get my apps to work, and I can't tell what data is being sold where or what I've agreed to. I can't even see the small print. I think the AI companies do that on purpose. It's only going to be through productive regulations that things move in a good direction. These here and now issues will help shape future sophisticated technologies, because if we have a sort of cultural understanding of AI privacy and it's encoded in legislation, that's going to restrict what will at some later point be issues involving the privacy of our own thoughts should individuals seek to enhance their brains with AI technologies. As AI goes in the head, we lay the groundwork now in our policy debates.
Let's back up and talk a little bit about the issue of how would we determine if an AI was actually conscious? Because you did write quite a bit about that issue.
Sure. I have two suggestions, two tests. I was lucky to work with a colleague over at the Institute for Advanced Study when I was there, Edwin Turner. He's an astrophysicist at Princeton, on one test. So I'll start with that one. It may seem science fiction-like, but I'll explain why I think it's important. Think of 2001, when HAL is being dismantled. HAL is a computer system out in space that cracks up, basically, goes crazy, and has to be dismantled. And there's this lovely scene where HAL is explaining what it feels like.
He certainly sounds conscious by what we just said consciousness means.
I mean, that scene is amazing. Or if you ever saw Blade Runner, think of when Deckard is interviewing Rachel to see if she's a replicant. He's looking for emotional reactions. He's basically trying to gauge her feelings. And the idea there is that we could have questions that probe for conscious experience. Turner and myself actually wrote questions that you could give an artificial intelligence just to kind of get the ball running on these issues. But now I need to make qualifications. So I don't think that you can probe all AI systems for consciousness and definitely say the test is definitive. In other words, it's kind of like kindergarten class. Nobody fails. You can pass with flying colors, though, but you can't fail. So in other words, it's a means of detecting consciousness in systems. But what if a system's non-linguistic? I mean, it would be entirely inappropriate to run a test on a system that doesn't have linguistic capacities. Or what if a system just is so alien that it doesn't even think like we do? It would be inappropriate to run that kind of test. You also can only do it at the R&D stage when you know what data is in the system, because obviously if you have, think of a classical program where you've just fed it lines of code so that it answers in the right sort of way. But I think that you do have to seriously test your machine before you let it out into the world. Tests like that are commonplace. So I say that kind of a test is what we'd call a sufficient condition for machine consciousness. If something passes the test, then we could say that it's conscious. And then, yes, it does deserve special legal protections, as you mentioned earlier. I mean, you can't just dial it out, or you shouldn't be able to. But then there are other ways that I think we will learn about machine consciousness. Another test, and this one I think we'll actually know the answer to. This is exciting. So this goes back to the brain enhancement work. There are also a lot of medical programs that involve neural prosthetics, AI-based chips in the head designed to alleviate injuries and illnesses. So many people with Parkinson's right now have
deep brain stimulators.
So Theodore Berger has an actual brain chip that I believe it's in phase 2 or 3 clinical trials in humans. And I'm hearing really good things about it. And what it is it's designed to replace certain functions of the hippocampus so that individuals, these famous memory loss cases like H.M. and Clive Wearing, people like that will be able to have memory again. And wow, that's phenomenally exciting. He's been working on this for like 20 years, and he's really been making progress. And of course, the Defense Department's very excited. And they have their projects too, right? They have these closed loop neural implants for post-traumatic stress disorder and mood disorders. So anyway, there's all this neural prosthetic work that's well underway. Now, what does this have to do with testing consciousness? Suppose we figure out which areas of the brain are part of the neural basis of consciousness. It's actually an ongoing debate. But suppose we have a sense of that in, say, 10 years, and we're starting to replace parts of the brain, in the case of injuries, with these neural prosthetics that involve areas that underlie conscious experience. Well, as we do that, we better watch carefully to see the quality of conscious experience in the patients. Will we get Oliver Sacks cases? This is interesting because we will eventually learn whether microchips are capable of underlying conscious experience. And medicine will have an incentive to build better and better devices that do allow consciousness to stay online or go back online in the case of certain injuries. So I think we'll learn something about whether microchips underlie experience. And that means that if there's a machine that's built of those microchips, we'd better be very careful how we treat it because it could very well be conscious. I think machine consciousness, though, is also a matter of the overall architecture of the machine. From a precautionary standpoint, we better know what we're deploying. Suppose we use a robot in military operations. We better know if it's conscious or not. We better make design decisions to the extent that we can. So that's where I have a chapter on consciousness engineering, where I talk about the idea that in certain technological sectors, we may actually not want to build conscious machines.
Like if we're going to send something to a dangerous environment,
it may not be ethical. And, there's a debate there because, I've talked to soldiers before and, they sometimes will say to me, if they could diminish their suffering, they wouldn't want to because it's precisely that they can suffer that makes them behave ethically. That's why I think it's very important at the R&D stage to see not just whether a machine is conscious, but what it does to the overall architecture of the system, because I suspect consciousness will have an impact on what a machine does and doesn't do. A lot of these issues are played out in Westworld in a really clever way where, the machines evolve consciousness and it changes their behavior. There's a lot that we need to discuss as a society. Do we really want to build more sentient beings when we're not even taking care of the ones that exist right now, right? And you might say, well, yeah, let's just build conscious androids and just make it so that they want to serve us all day. Well, that's freaky. Many of your listeners read Brave New World, right? And people were genetically engineered. They were given drugs so that they liked their place in society. Well, is it really fair to tweak a machine architecture so that all it wants to do is serve us, or even so it can't suffer? You might say that. These are the kind of issues we need to think about as we seek to build general intelligence. And I even think we need to ask whether we really want to have general intelligences. Maybe we should just have domain-specific ones. What I see now is a lot of people thinking that these technologies are inevitable. It's inevitable that AI will go in the head, that we'll merge with AIs. It's inevitable that we'll build general intelligences that will outmode us in the workplace and so on.
That brings me to the question I want to close with, and that is, you argue in your book for what you call a stance of metaphysical humility. Would you explain what that means?
Years of teaching metaphysics and intro to philosophy, where I taught a lot of issues in metaphysics. Every key issue in intro to philosophy, no easy solution. Free will, the debate over whether we have free will, the debate over what the nature of the mind is, debates in ethics about what is right. I mean, there are these really important positions, well worth teaching, and it's great to get the students to think, but there's no absolutely uncontroversial answer. And in fact, when you slept through the literature on just so many topics in philosophy, there are holes in all kinds of positions. And I think it's actually easier to find problems with the positions than to defend a positive view effectively. And so what does all this teach us? Well, look, I hope that it doesn't mean that people will throw their hands up and refuse to think about the nature of the self, because when they walk into the Center for Mind Design, if they do, or their grandchildren, it's a life or death issue. So like it or not, metaphysics is actually an issue of life and death when it comes to artificial intelligence. Issues about consciousness, the self and the mind are essential to the human future. But, and this is where I get to metaphysical humility, look, I'm not going to tell you that one particular position is right, because that would be disingenuous. The most I can do is I can send you to the literature and I can explain it to you and I can tell you there's no easy answer. What I think when it comes to enhancement, people should do is they should seek, to the extent that they want to enhance, enhancements that are actually compatible with many of the leading theories that they care about. For example, I can't rule out the idea that the mind is the brain. I can't rule out the idea that there's some sort of immaterial mind or soul. It's really hard to rule out a lot of these positions. So if I'm making a decision about whether to buy Merge or Zen Garden, I should be asking, are my decisions compatible with both of those views or all the views I respect? Because I want to be sure I'm going to survive. So that's why we should be metaphysically humble. We shouldn't assume that we're right. I can tell you as a philosopher that I've been absolutely passionate about certain ideas only to find 10 years later some new issue that really made me change my mind. And we should be open to that possibility.
Right. And I think that's an underlying theme of your book that I want to emphasize is about being open-minded and really thinking about these questions, not assuming that some self-prescribed expert has the answers.
That's right. In a way, don't trust the experts because they all disagree. Read the experts, but as Friedrich Nietzsche said, watch out for falling statues.
That's a good one. So I know you said you're getting ready to testify at Congress. So I guess you're going to be spending a lot of time with follow-up on this book because it's a pretty important topic.
Luckily, I'm not testifying.
Oh, yeah, sorry. That does sound sort of like confrontational, doesn't it?
What I get to do, and this is really an honor and a privilege, is I get to go out to breakfast with members of Congress and I get to present on my book. And all year at the wonderful Kluge Center at the Library of Congress, I get to set up activities to educate staffers and members of Congress about artificial intelligence. So that I find to be really wonderful. And I'm just having so much fun there at the Kluge Center.
Great. I guess I need to write my congresswoman a letter and tell her to check that out.
Oh, thank you. That would be great. And in a way, the most important thing I can do in DC is try to reach out to think tanks, policymakers more generally, staffers, people who will be around in 5 years. Members of Congress, they tend to worry a lot about re-election. They have a short window, but it's those staffers and members of the think tank community who are absolutely essential. But it's always an honor to work with members of Congress. And I hope that things happen. I mean, I do worry that with the impeachment issue, it's sort of taking over the work on AI as well as everything else, which is such an incredible shame.
Well, Susan, I really have enjoyed talking with you, and I enjoyed your book, and I'm looking forward to sharing our conversation with my listeners.
And I am one of your listeners, as you know, I was telling you, and I have really enjoyed talking to you, and it's a special privilege for me because I really love your podcast.
Well, thank you. First, I want to thank Susan Schneider for coming on Books and Ideas to talk about her new book, Artificial You, AI and the Future of the Mind. There's no shortage of books speculating about the future of AI and consciousness. But what I appreciated about Schneider's approach was that she went past the issue of how will we know if AI is conscious to two more personal issues, the implication of enhancement and the possibility of uploading our consciousness in some sort of digital form. Today, we only touched briefly on these three topics, and I can already anticipate the emails I'm going to get about the conversation lacking scientific rigor. The reality is that experts disagree about if and when any of these three issues will become a reality. But even so, Schneider makes the important point that we should start addressing the ethical and even the metaphysical issues now. An example of an ethical issue is, how will we treat AI if it becomes conscious? She talked briefly about how we could even figure out if a machine really was conscious, but in the book, Schneider argues for trying to avoid creating AI that's in the gray zone, where we can't be sure. Besides, is creating conscious machines even desirable? Enhancements are already on the horizon, so I think it's reasonable to begin thinking about their implications, including, like she pointed out, potential issues of privacy. If we start talking about what it means to be a person, we have entered the realm of metaphysics. Schneider argued persuasively that if we did upload our consciousness, we could cease to exist. And while I'm skeptical that neuroscience is actually anywhere near being able to describe what the human brain does in sufficient detail, it's not too soon to think about the implications of possible future technologies. If our conversation sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to read Artificial You, AI, and the Future of Your Mind by Susan Schneider. Before I close, I want to take a moment to talk about the future of Books and Ideas. Books and Ideas actually launched only 1 week after Brain Science, way back in December 2006. It's never had a very large audience, and it went on hiatus from January 2017 until January 2019. I'm really proud that I've released an episode every month in 2019, but the audience has remained rather modest. It's possible that I will reduce the frequency of episodes in 2020, but this will depend on whether I'm successful in my efforts to encourage fans of brain science to subscribe to Books and Ideas, listen to back episodes, and hopefully send me feedback. Also, if I get enough support on Patreon to cover audio editing, that will make a difference. As I mentioned before, you can get more episodes of Books and Ideas in your favorite podcasting app for free, or you can go to booksandideas.com. If you want to see all my podcasts in one place, go to virginiacampbellmd.com. Please send me email at docartemis@gmail.com. Submit voice feedback at speakpipe.com/docartemis, or post to the Books and Ideas fan page on Facebook. The next episode of Books and Ideas will come out on January 15th, 2020. In the meantime, I hope you will check out my other podcasts, Brain Science and Graying Rainbows. Thanks again for listening. I look forward to talking with you again very soon. Books and Ideas is copyright 2019 to Virginia Campbell, MD. You can copy this show to share it with others, but for any other uses or derivatives, please contact me at docartemis@gmail.com. Theme music for Books and Ideas is The Open Door by Beatnik Turtle. Please visit their website at beatnikturtle.com.